The room went quiet when he said it. Not awkward quiet. Execution quiet. Victor Hale slid the folder across the table toward me with 2 fingers, like it was something contaminated. Sign it, he said. You're the director. This loss sits with you. I stared at the number circled in red. $3,047,000. My jaw tightened. My hands stayed still on the polished conference table. You authorized the trade, I said calmly. I warned you in writing. Victor leaned back in his leather chair, smiling. That slow, smug smile that always meant he thought he'd already won. Then consider this your chance to be a team player. My chest burned. Not panic. Betrayal. Because this wasn't about money. This was about making me disappear. I glanced around the room. Legal. HR. 2 executives who wouldn't meet my gaze. They all knew. They all stayed silent. Victor's voice softened, fake concern dripping from every word. Or, he added, we can talk about your future here. The threat landed clean. I realized in that moment, he wasn't asking. He was forcing me to choose between my integrity and my career. I pushed the folder back across the table. No. The silence that followed felt like glass breaking in slow motion. Victor's smile vanished. His eyes went cold, calculating. He glanced at Patricia from legal, who nodded slightly. They had prepared for this. They had anticipated my refusal. That made it worse somehow. It meant this wasn't impulsive rage or panic. This was calculated destruction. I see, Victor said, his voice turning formal. Professional. Detached. Then I think we're done here. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. The others rose with him, gathering their folders and laptops like actors exiting a stage. Nobody looked at me. Not Patricia. Not Thomas from HR. Not the 2 executives whose names I'd forgotten because they'd always been Victor's shadows. I sat alone at the table as they filed out, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like a tomb ceiling. My phone buzzed. An email. Subject, calendar update. Every meeting for the next 2 weeks had been deleted. All of them. Gone. That was the day my boss forced me out after I refused to absorb a $3 million loss. And that was the moment he decided the risk ended with my exit. He was wrong. My name is Teresa Moore. I'm 36 years old, and until that meeting, I had built my reputation on one thing. Never lying to protect someone else's ego. I had spent 8 years at Crossfield Capital climbing quietly. No shortcuts. No scandals. No office politics. Just results. Numbers didn't lie, and neither did I. That's what made me valuable. And that's exactly what made Victor Hale hate me. I remembered the day I started. Fresh MBA, hungry to prove myself in financial risk management. The firm was smaller then, scrappier. Victor had been a senior trader, charismatic and bold. Everyone loved him. He took risks that paid off more often than they should have. That made him a legend. But legends don't always age well. By the time I became director of risk assessment 3 years ago, Victor had moved into senior management. He still acted like a trader though. Still made gut decisions. Still believed his instincts were better than data. And he couldn't stand that I was the one person who would tell him when he was wrong. The trade had been his idea from the beginning. High-risk derivatives. Poorly timed. Rushed through approval without proper hedging. It happened 6 weeks before the meeting. Victor had called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. I need you to sign off on something, he'd said casually, sliding a proposal across his desk. I read it once. Then again. My stomach dropped. This exposure is massive, I said carefully. If the market shifts even slightly, it won't, Victor interrupted. I've been doing this for 20 years, Teresa. Trust me. But trust wasn't the same as analysis. I took the proposal back to my office and ran the numbers 3 different ways. Every scenario showed the same thing. Unacceptable risk. That night, I sent Victor an email at 11:30. Detailed. Professional. Clear. I cannot recommend approval of this trade. The downside exposure exceeds our risk tolerance by a factor of 4. Please reconsider or provide additional hedging strategies. He never replied. 2 days later, I saw the trade had been executed anyway. He'd gone around me, using his executive authority to push it through. I documented everything. Saved every email. Every timestamp. Every approval chain. Because I knew. People like Victor never accepted responsibility. They always needed someone to blame. The collapse happened fast. 18 days after execution, the market moved exactly the way my models predicted it might. Not a crash. Just a shift. A recalibration. But that was enough. The position lost value rapidly, bleeding millions in a matter of hours. I was in a client meeting when my phone started buzzing. Text after text. Then a call from Victor. My office. Now. I excused myself and walked down the hall, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see him pacing. Red-faced. Angry. When I entered, he didn't offer me a seat. How bad is it? He demanded. I pulled up the data on my tablet. 3.047 million. And the position is still open. Victor's jaw clenched. Close it. At current prices, we'll lock in the loss. I said close it. I did. The loss became permanent. Final. Undeniable. For 3 days, Victor said nothing. Avoided me. Cancelled our weekly review meeting. I knew he was planning something. I just didn't know what. Until that folder slid across the conference table. By Friday afternoon, my calendar was wiped. Every meeting. Every review. Every client call. Gone. HR summoned me at 4 o'clock. Thomas handed me a severance packet, his expression carefully neutral. Rehearsed. The firm has decided to restructure the risk management department, he said, reading from a script. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately. This packet contains your severance terms. 2 months' salary. Continued benefits for 60 days. Standard non-disparagement agreement. I flipped through the pages. Clean. Professional. Deliberately vague about the reasons. No mention of the loss. No mention of Victor. Just corporate language about organizational needs and strategic direction. Where do I sign? I asked. Thomas looked surprised. Maybe he expected tears or arguments. But I'd already made my decision in that conference room. I wasn't going to fight a system designed to protect people like Victor. I signed the papers. Handed back my keycard and laptop. Victor didn't even walk me out. He sent his assistant, a nervous young man named Kyle who kept apologizing for things that weren't his fault. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Calm face. Eyes too sharp to be broken. I wasn't angry. I was focused. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my personal laptop open. Not to rage. Not to vent on social media or send angry emails I'd regret. I pulled up every email I'd saved. Every approval chain. Every timestamp. Every warning I'd sent that Victor had ignored. And that's when I noticed something he didn't. The loss wasn't finished unraveling. The 3 million wasn't isolated. It was leveraged against a second-tier credit structure that hadn't fully settled yet. A technical detail buried in the fine print that most people would miss. But I didn't miss details. That was my job. If the underlying credit market moved again, even slightly, the exposure would multiply. The 3 million could become 6. Maybe 8. And Victor had just removed the one person who understood exactly how that structure worked. He thought the bleeding stopped when he forced me out. He was wrong. The wound was still open. He just couldn't see it yet. I sat back, staring at the screen. I could warn them. Send an anonymous email. Call someone I trusted in compliance. But something stopped me. Victor had made his choice. He'd chosen to lie. To hide. To throw me away rather than admit his mistake. Now he could live with the consequences. I didn't call anyone. I didn't reach out to former colleagues or try to sound alarms. I let Victor believe the risk walked out with me in a cardboard box full of family photos and office plants. Instead, I updated my resume. Quietly. Carefully. I'd been too comfortable at Crossfield. Too loyal. 8 years in one place was admirable, but it had also made me complacent. The market had changed. My value had grown. And I'd let Victor's ego keep me from exploring what else was out there. I started reaching out to recruiters. Professional networks. Former classmates who'd moved into senior positions at other firms. Within 2 days, I had 3 preliminary calls scheduled. Within a week, I had 2 serious interviews lined up. My reputation, it turned out, was bigger than Crossfield Capital. People knew my work. Respected my analysis. Several had even heard rumors about what happened. Not the details, but enough to know I'd been pushed out after refusing to compromise my standards. In finance, that kind of integrity was rare. Valuable. It made me more attractive, not less. Victor thought destroying my career at Crossfield would destroy me. He forgot that talent doesn't disappear. It just finds better places to land. 3 days after I cleaned out my desk, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer. "Is this Teresa Moore?" A familiar voice asked. My stomach tightened. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Martin Kessler." I nearly dropped my phone. Martin Kessler ran Kessler Holdings, one of Crossfield's 3 largest clients. They represented almost 30% of the firm's managed assets. I'd worked directly with their team for 2 years, building models and risk assessments that had saved them millions. "Mr. Kessler," I said carefully, "it's good to hear from you." "I wish it were under better circumstances," he replied. His tone was concerned. Professional. "We were just informed that you're no longer with Crossfield Capital." No explanation. Just a brief email saying our account would be reassigned. My chest tightened. Victor hadn't even told them properly. Just a generic notification, like I was a piece of equipment being replaced. "That's correct," I said. "I left the firm last Friday." Silence on the other end. "Then, may I ask why? Your work for us has been exceptional." I chose my words carefully. I was asked to take responsibility for a loss I didn't authorize. I declined. Another pause. Longer this time. "That's not what Victor told us." Martin's voice shifted. Still professional, but with an edge now. Concern mixed with something else. Suspicion. "Victor assured us the transition would be seamless," he continued. "He said you were pursuing other opportunities. That it was amicable." I closed my eyes, anger burning in my chest. Of course Victor had lied. "It wasn't," I said simply. Then what actually happened? I could have stayed silent. Could have referenced the non-disparagement clause I'd signed. Could have protected Victor one more time. But Martin deserved the truth. His firm trusted Crossfield with hundreds of millions of dollars. They had a right to know who they were dealing with. 6 weeks ago, Victor authorized a high-risk trade against my recommendation, I explained. I warned him in writing about the exposure. He executed anyway. When it collapsed, he tried to make me sign a document taking responsibility. I refused. By the end of the week, I was out. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mr. Kessler?" "I'm here," he said quietly. "Just processing." "Then, how much was the loss?" $3.047 million. He exhaled slowly. "And where does that leave Crossfield's exposure now?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. The one Victor hoped nobody would ask. "That depends," I said carefully. "Has the secondary structure been hedged?" I could hear Martin moving, probably pulling up reports on his computer. "What secondary structure?" he asked. My stomach dropped. Victor hadn't told them. He'd hidden the full scope of the exposure. The loss wasn't isolated, I explained. It was leveraged against a second-tier credit structure. If that market shifts before it settles, the exposure multiplies. Multiplies by how much? I did the math in my head. Conservatively, double. Worst case? Triple. Martin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. Victor told us everything was stable, contained, that the issue was resolved. It's not, I said. And if the exposure hasn't been properly hedged yet, it won't be. Not without someone who understands how that structure works. I didn't say what we were both thinking. That someone had been me. And Victor had just forced me out. Can you explain exactly how bad this could get? Martin asked. I could. And I did. For the next 20 minutes, I walked him through every detail. The leverage ratios. The settlement timelines. The market conditions that could trigger a cascade. I held nothing back. When I finished, Martin was silent for several seconds. Hypothetically, he finally said. If you were advising us independently, he paused. What would you recommend? My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From control. Victor had built his authority on appearing indispensable. On being the only one who understood the big picture. Now his biggest client was asking for my guidance instead. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I stayed professional. First, I'd request complete transparency from Crossfield on the current exposure status, I said. Full documentation. Not summaries. Actual positions. Second, I'd bring in an independent analyst to verify the risk assessment. Someone Victor doesn't control. And third? Martin asked. Third, I'd seriously consider whether you want to keep working with a firm whose senior management tried to hide a $3 million loss by scapegoating their risk director. Martin was quiet. Then, can you send me your analysis? Everything you just explained. I can have it to you by tonight, I replied. Good. He paused. And Teresa, thank you for telling the truth. After we hung up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table. My heart was pounding. What I'd just done would have consequences. Big ones. Victor would know exactly who Martin had talked to. There would be retaliation. Threats. Maybe legal action, though I'd been careful not to violate my non-disclosure agreement. I'd only shared information about risks that directly affected Martin's investments. That was legal. Ethical. Necessary. But it would still make me a target. I pulled up my files and started writing the analysis. Detailed. Thorough. Devastating. If Victor wanted a war, he'd just started one with the wrong person. I heard later, from a former colleague who still trusted me, that Victor slammed his office door that afternoon. Martin had called him directly after our conversation, demanding answers. Documentation. Proof that the exposure was actually contained like he'd claimed. Victor apparently tried to bluster his way through it. Confident explanations. Executive reassurance. But Martin wasn't accepting vague promises anymore. He wanted numbers. Real ones. And Victor couldn't produce them. Why? Because I'd been the one who managed those reports. I'd been the one who understood the underlying structures. Victor had spent years taking credit for work I did. Now he was discovering what happened when the person actually doing the work disappeared. By the end of the day, compliance had started asking questions too. Quiet questions. Careful ones. About approval chains. About who authorized what. About why the risk director had been terminated so suddenly after a major loss. Victor's carefully constructed narrative was starting to crack. And once those cracks appeared, they would spread. That was the nature of institutional failures. They never collapsed all at once. They eroded slowly, one revealed lie at a time, until the whole structure came down. I didn't need to push. I just needed to wait. I didn't go back to Crossfield. That chapter was closed. But I did start consulting. Quietly. Legally. Clean. Martin formally hired me as an independent risk advisor for Kessler Holdings. My job was simple. Review their entire portfolio with Crossfield. Identify any other hidden exposures. Provide strategic recommendations. It was contract work. Professional. Completely above board. But it gave me access to information Victor desperately wanted to keep hidden. Within 3 days, I'd found 2 other positions that carried similar structural risks. Smaller than the big one, but still significant. Still dangerous if not properly managed. I documented everything in a report that went directly to Martin and his board. No theatrics. No accusations. Just data. Cold. Clean. Undeniable. Martin forwarded a copy to Crossfield's CEO. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one bad trade anymore. It was about systemic risk management failures. About a senior executive who prioritized appearances over safety. About a culture that punished truth-tellers instead of protecting them. Victor couldn't stop it without admitting he'd lied. He couldn't discredit me without revealing he'd tried to hide losses. He was trapped. And for the first time since I'd known him, Victor Hale had no easy way out. Victor tried to control the narrative anyway. He sent confident emails to major clients, reassuring them, promising stability. He held an emergency meeting with the executive team, explaining that I was disgruntled and spreading misinformation. I heard all this through my network. People I'd worked with for years who were horrified by what they were witnessing. Several reached out privately. Quietly. "Is it true?" they asked. "Did he really try to make you take the fall?" I didn't gossip. Didn't trash Victor publicly. I just told the truth when asked directly. And the truth was damning enough on its own. Meanwhile, the secondary exposure Victor had ignored continued growing. The credit market shifted, just like my models predicted it might. Small movements. Nothing catastrophic. But enough to prove my analysis had been accurate. The potential loss was now tracking towards 6 million. Then 7. And Victor still hadn't properly hedged the position. Why? Because hedging now would lock in additional losses. It would require admitting to the board that the situation was worse than he'd claimed. So he gambled instead. Doubled down on optimism. Prayed the market would turn in his favor. It was the same kind of thinking that created the first loss. And it was about to create something much worse. When the secondary loss materialized, it was $8.2 million. Combined with the original $3 million, Crossfield Capital had lost over $11 million on positions Victor had personally authorized. The board demanded a full investigation. Every email. Every approval. Every warning flag that had been ignored. Including mine. Especially mine. Legal reached out to me through official channels. Not threatening. Not defensive. Just professional. "Can you confirm the timeline of your warnings regarding the trades in question?" they asked. I forwarded every email I'd saved. Every recommendation Victor had dismissed. Every analysis he'd ignored. No commentary. No emotion. Just documentation. Time-stamped. Verified. Undeniable. I also mentioned the exit meeting. The folder he'd tried to make me sign. The choice he'd forced. Legal thanked me and hung up. 2 hours later, Victor was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. I found out from a news alert. The financial press had picked up the story. Not the details yet, but enough to know something major was happening at Crossfield Capital. "Senior executive suspended amid loss investigation," the headline read. My phone started buzzing with messages from former colleagues. Some supportive. Some asking what I knew. I didn't respond to most of them. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about vindication. It was about consequences finally catching up to someone who thought he was immune to them. Victor's allies disappeared overnight. The executives who'd sat silently in that conference room while he tried to destroy me? They were suddenly nowhere near him. Meetings happened without him. Decisions were made around him. The same isolation he'd created for me was now surrounding him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered his smile. That smug, certain smile as he slid the folder across the table. The smile that said he thought I had no choice. That he'd won before the game even started. No. I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt vindicated. 3 weeks after Victor's suspension, my phone rang at 10:42 at night. I almost didn't answer. But something made me look at the caller ID. It was him. I let it ring 3 times. 4. Then I answered. "Teresa," he said. His voice was tight. Desperate. "We need to talk." I sat in my dark living room, looking out at the city lights. "No," I replied calmly. "You need to listen." Silence. "I warned you," I continued. "Twice. You chose optics over accountability. You chose your ego over your clients. And when the consequences came, you tried to make me disappear rather than face what you'd done." "Teresa, I'm not finished." My voice was steady. Cold. "You thought forcing me out would end the risk. That silencing me would make the truth go away. But risk doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It compounds." I paused. "And now everyone knows what you really are." He tried to respond. I hung up. 2 days later, Martin called again. "We're moving our assets," he said. No preamble. No small talk. All of them. I wasn't surprised. "Where?" "That depends. Would you be interested in a senior advisory role? Full-time position. Not contract work." My breath caught. "With Kessler Holdings?" "Not exactly," Martin replied. "We're partnering with Belmont Financial to create a new risk management division. Independent. Transparent. Everything Crossfield should have been but wasn't. We want you to build it." I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. That's a significant opportunity." "You've earned it," Martin said simply. "And frankly, after what we just witnessed, we need someone who values truth over politics. Someone who'll tell us when we're wrong, even if it's uncomfortable. Especially then." The offer came through that afternoon. Senior Director of Risk Assessment. Salary that was 40% higher than what I'd made at Crossfield. Equity stake in the new division. Full autonomy over hiring and methodology. And a clause requiring complete transparency. No hidden losses. No scapegoating. No tolerance for executives who prioritized ego over accuracy. I signed it that evening. My new office would be in the same building where I'd had my final interview. Glass walls. Morning light. A seat at the table I'd earned honestly. Not through politics or compromise, but through competence and integrity. Victor was terminated quietly 2 weeks later. No announcement. No press release. No farewell email thanking him for his years of service. Just absence. One day he was suspended. The next day, his name was removed from the company directory. The firm's official statement called it strategic restructuring. Everyone knew better. The financial press eventually pieced together the story. Not perfectly, but close enough. Executive forced out risk director, then hid losses, one headline read. My name wasn't mentioned. I'd made sure of that. This wasn't about publicity. It was about justice. Several of Victor's former supporters tried to distance themselves. Claimed they hadn't known the full story. That they'd been misled. But the emails told a different story. They'd known. They'd chosen sides. And they'd chosen wrong. 3 of them left Crossfield within a month. 1 was pushed out. 2 resigned before they could be pushed. The rot had gone deeper than just Victor. He'd built a culture where loyalty to management mattered more than accuracy. Where questioning authority was treated as betrayal. That culture had finally caught up with them. And the cost was measured in millions of dollars and destroyed reputations. I didn't celebrate their downfall. But I didn't mourn it either. They'd made their choices. Now they lived with the consequences. I walked into my new office 3 weeks after signing with Belmont Financial. The space was exactly what Martin had promised. Glass walls letting in morning light. A view of the city skyline. Modern furniture that suggested success without being ostentatious. My name was already on the door. Teresa Moore. Senior Director of Risk Assessment. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. Letting it sink in. This wasn't just a new job. It was validation that integrity had value. That speaking truth to power wasn't career suicide. Sometimes it was career advancement. My assistant knocked softly. Ms. Moore? Your team is ready in the conference room. My team. 3 analysts I'd personally recruited. Smart. Ethical. Hungry to build something that mattered. We spent the morning establishing our framework. Our principles. What we would and wouldn't tolerate. If you see risk, you report it, I told them. No matter who authorized the position. No matter how important they think they are. Your job is to protect this firm and its clients. Not to protect egos. They nodded, understanding. One of them, a young analyst named Alexis, raised her hand. What if leadership doesn't want to hear it? I smiled. Then you come to me. And I'll make sure they hear it. That's why I'm here. Word spread quickly in the financial industry. Teresa Moore, the risk director who'd been forced out of Crossfield for refusing to cover up losses, was now building a new division focused on transparency and accountability. Recruiters started calling. Talented analysts who were tired of toxic cultures. People who wanted to work somewhere their expertise was valued, not feared. Within 2 months, we'd doubled our team size. Within 4 months, we'd signed 3 major clients beyond Kessler Holdings. All of them had one thing in common. They'd been burned by firms that prioritized appearances over accuracy. They wanted something different. Someone different. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Board meeting went well. They're impressed with your progress. Keep it up. I smiled. Not smug. Just satisfied. This was what success felt like. Not climbing over others. Not playing politics or protecting the wrong people. Just doing excellent work with people who shared your values. And being rewarded for it. That night, I had dinner with Alexis and 2 other team members. We talked about our latest analysis. Debated methodologies. Laughed about mistakes we'd caught before they became disasters. This was what work should feel like. Collaborative. Honest. Safe enough to admit when you didn't know something and ask for help. Everything Crossfield hadn't been under Victor's leadership. 6 months after I left Crossfield, I received an invitation to speak at the National Risk Management Conference. The topic, Ethics in Financial Risk Assessment, when accuracy conflicts with authority. I almost declined. I didn't want to be defined by what happened with Victor. But then I thought about all the analysts who were still trapped in toxic cultures. Who were being pressured to hide risks or soften assessments to please executives. Who needed to know they weren't alone. I accepted. The conference room was packed. Over 300 people. I saw faces I recognized from the industry. Former colleagues. Competitors. Journalists who'd covered the Crossfield story. I kept my presentation factual. I didn't name Victor or trash Crossfield publicly. Instead, I talked about systemic issues. About cultures that punished honesty. About the real cost of prioritizing short-term appearances over long-term stability. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than I expected. Afterward, dozens of people approached me. Young analysts thanking me for speaking up. Senior executives asking about our methodology at Belmont. Recruiters wanting to know if we were hiring. One woman, probably in her 50s, shook my hand with tears in her eyes. I was forced out 15 years ago for the same reason, she said. Nobody believed me then. Thank you for proving we weren't wrong. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. A year after I refused to sign that folder, I stood in front of Belmont Financial's board of directors presenting our annual results. The numbers spoke for themselves. 0 hidden losses. 0 compliance violations. Client satisfaction scores in the 98th percentile. And profitability that exceeded projections by 18%. Outstanding work, Ms. Moore, the board chair said. You've built exactly what we hoped for. But the real measure of success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the culture. Analysts felt safe raising concerns. Executives listened to bad news instead of shooting the messenger. We'd proven that transparency and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. They reinforced each other. After the meeting, Martin pulled me aside. I heard from someone at Crossfield, he said quietly. They're still struggling. Lost 3 more major clients last quarter. The new leadership can't seem to stabilize things. I nodded. Culture doesn't change overnight. No, Martin agreed. It takes years to build trust. Minutes to destroy it. They're learning that the hard way. He paused. Victor reached out to me last month. Looking for work. Wanted a reference. My stomach tightened. What did you tell him? Martin smiled. I told him the truth. That he was brilliant at appearing competent but terrible at actually being competent. That he valued loyalty over accuracy. And that I'd never work with him again. Did he respond? No, Martin said. What could he say? I never saw Victor again. Heard about him occasionally through industry gossip. He'd taken a position at a much smaller firm. Significant pay cut. No direct reports. All the authority and prestige he'd spent decades building had evaporated in a matter of months. Some people said I destroyed his career. That I was vindictive. Unforgiving. I disagreed. Victor destroyed his own career. I just refused to go down with him. There's a difference between revenge and accountability. Revenge is hurting someone because they hurt you. Accountability is allowing natural consequences to occur when someone makes destructive choices. I didn't fabricate anything. Didn't lie. Didn't sabotage. I simply told the truth when asked directly. And I refused to sacrifice my integrity to protect his ego. If that destroyed him, it's because his entire career was built on a foundation of smoke and mirrors. When someone finally refused to maintain the illusion, the whole thing collapsed. That wasn't my fault. It was inevitable. The only question was when it would happen and who would be collateral damage when it did. By refusing to sign that folder, I made sure I wasn't one of the casualties. I chose to protect myself. My reputation. My future. And I'd make the same choice again without hesitation. 2 years later, I sat in my corner office at Belmont Financial, reviewing quarterly reports. Our division had become the firm's most profitable unit. We'd expanded to 4 cities. Hired 32 analysts. Built a reputation for uncompromising accuracy. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize. A young analyst. I just read about what happened at Crossfield, she wrote. I'm in a similar situation now. My director wants me to adjust a risk assessment to make a deal look better. I don't know what to do. Did you ever regret refusing? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed my response. Not once. The fear of consequences is always worse than the actual consequences. Trust your integrity. It's the only thing nobody can take from you. I hit send and leaned back. Victor thought forcing me out ended the risk. He forgot something critical. Risk doesn't disappear when you silence the truth. It compounds. And when it finally surfaces, it doesn't destroy the person who refused to lie. It destroys the one who thought they were untouchable. I didn't win by staying. I didn't win by fighting. I won by knowing my worth and refusing to compromise it. Even when it cost me everything. Because what I gained was more valuable than what I lost. Self-respect. Professional integrity. And a career built on truth instead of politics. That was worth more than any title Victor could have given me. And it was worth every uncomfortable moment that came with standing alone. The room went quiet when he said it. But I'm not quiet anymore. Neither should you be.